hey everyone, we are here again for our viewer question and answer video series. This time we are in Hawaii, where I wish I was right now. It sounds so magical. That's all. I remember I have gone to Hawaii before, and it was magical. So Bertha, I am very envious of you right now that you're there. Works in the pet industry. You do some boarding and you have a blog. You said, what's the name of your blog?
It's Aloha Dog Mom.
Okay, we'll have to check that out. So you are bringing 3 questions to us today. So what is your first question?
Okay, my first question is, if rigor mortis, the way I understand it is it sets in after a certain time, but it also goes away after a certain time. Mm-hmm. So when you're embalming someone, why is it that I know there's times where you had mentioned before that you have to break up the rigor, but why can't you just wait until rigor mortis passes to embalm a person?
You can, but the reason that rigor mortis has passed is that the tissue essentially and what creates that rigor mortis has basically decomposed so much that it's going away. And so if you're waiting for it to go away on its own, that means the tissue is decaying, and we want to get in there before it does and preserve that tissue. So we break up that, that locked in tissue to get everything where we need it to be, and then preserve, which then sets the tissue and everything in the place where we want it. So we don't want that decomposition to happen and for that rigor to pass before we get in and do what we do.
Okay. So all my questions kind of have to do with the embalming sense.
No, you're good.
The other one is, I know that you say you have to use special solutions for someone who has edema, but when you're embalming, wouldn't the edema go away because now you're pulling all that, like the natural blood and all of that made the person swell up or anything like that? So wouldn't it in essence kind of go away and then you wouldn't have to deal with it? Or does it kind of just stay there and then that's it?
So the edema is in your tissue. It's not in your vasculature system per se. It's trying to think of it's like if your tissue was a sponge and you had like a straw laying under it. So what you're doing through that straw is not, going to pull out the moisture so much, but what we put through that straw is going to permeate out into the sponge. And so if we do a really strong drying fluid, that will then dry out and pull out things from the spongy tissue. And so that'll dry it out. But the edema doesn't just go away on its own because it's locked into that sponge layer. It will sometimes sweat out. So just like a glass of water will get that sweat effect because the deceased is not the same temperature as the room sometimes. And so the deceased will just start sweating out. And sometimes to the point, even more so, that there's just pools and pools and pools of, just so much fluid. Because when somebody, especially if it's a lot of edema from being on, maybe if they're on a ventilator at a hospital or something, they're being pumped with fluids constantly through the IVs, and they just swell up if their bodies, if their kidneys have shut down and things and their body's not processing, they're just retaining it all. People can put on 50 or more pounds of just water. So we try and dry that out, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes their face is so swollen that when it comes down, we then have all this saggy skin we're trying to deal with. But unfortunately, it just doesn't go away on its own. But we can definitely dry it out. And it's kind of cool to see, like you looking at maybe a leg that has edema and you're embalming and you can see it kind of shrinking down and you get these little creases as the tissue starts almost like a balloon deflating when it sits in a corner of a room and you look at it like a week later and it's kind of coming down, and it's that material that is then not stretched out and it gets that kind of little wavy, and that's what the tissue looks like on it. I'm coming up with analogies off the cuff here, but that's what it looks like. And it's kind of cool to see it really instantly happen after you've been injecting fluid for 15 minutes or so. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's working, yay. But no, I love the questions you're asking, because they're just logic questions. Like, why not? And there's reasons why not, but if you didn't know the context, they're great questions. I love it.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
No,
because I just never quite understood that part. Like, I understand that there are people that will have edema, but I just never quite understood during the embalming process, like, why wouldn't it just go away if you're taking all the stuff out and then replacing it with the fluid? And so, but all of that makes sense now.
Yeah. And sometimes when you're getting drainage, you can see additional fluid coming out. Just like if somebody's jaundiced, you can sometimes see this yellow stuff come out that's just been in there. So you can sometimes see some of that come out, but most of it's just set in the tissue and it's not moving. It's just kind of soaked in, I guess. Okay. The term. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. My last question is, if someone had been through, let's say, chemo or some type of radiation treatment and they've passed and then they're in your funeral home, do you all have to take certain precautions because they now have, I don't know, like chemicals or radiation in their system? So does that make it like, I don't want to say dangerous, but in the sense where you guys have to take more precaution now when you're embalming someone?
Not in the majority. There have been instances, and I'll have to look into more of those instances because they haven't happened around me at all, where someone has been on like a certain type of radiation that I want to say when they were cremated, there was precautions because that then goes into the air. I'll have to look into what that one story was, because there was a situation that they did have to do some special things. But on the typical side, no. Just like you being around somebody that's received radiation or chemo therapy, it's, there's no exposure, there's nothing, because we're wearing PPE that or personal protective equipment. So there's nothing that would be of concern really with them. So
okay. Well, those are my 3 questions.
Those are easy enough. So how many animals do you have in your house right now that you're housing?
Actually, I'm not boarding any at the moment because Hawaii is still slowly getting back into the norm. And so a lot of my clients, they weren't able to leave the island or anything like that. So they had to cancel their reservations, reschedule for a later time. But I did have 2 dogs last week.
Okay. Do you have any?
And then I have my own.
Pets?
Yes, of course. I have my own minions.
Okay. Just dogs or cats or?
No, just dogs. Just dogs. I'm not a speciesist or anything. It's just I've always grown up with dogs, and so I'm very familiar with the canine world. So hence why I have dogs.
Not a speciesist. Is that a word even?
I probably not, but I have so many people that'll ask me like, why don't you talk about cats or why don't you this? Is like, it's not that I don't like them. It's just I don't know anything about them. And so I've had people kind of come at me in a negative way because I don't talk about other animals, but I tell them, how can I talk about something I don't know about? And so I'm just like, it's not that so I try to come up with something. I'm like, I'm not a speciesist, it's just.
I make up words all the time. So I say, I don't even know what this is, but we're just going to use it because you know what I'm saying. So
right.
It works. So
yes, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for bringing questions and coming to me from Hawaii. So
thank you.
Let's see, what time is it where you're at?
It is 7:42 in the morning.
Thank you for getting up and being so fabulous. Look at how gorgeous you are at 7:42 in the morning.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining us, and keep an eye out for the next viewer question and answer session, and we'll see what state we're coming from next. So bye guys.